Greetings again, vinyl community. Just thought I'd take the opportunity to respond to Darcy 6 Strings 9 Lives request for 10 Desert Island discs. I think the rules were fairly loose. No more than 3 live records, no compilations. I also limited it, at least on myself, to strictly LPs. I could have pulled out some CDs probably that are my favorite discs, but thought I'd make it easy on myself and cull 10 out of my favorites bin. And anyway, we'll get started. Having a little coffee this morning from my Who mug that I've somehow managed to hold on to for about 15 years and through several job changes, and it's still with me somehow. First thing I pulled out, Pete Townsend's All the Best Cowboys Have Chinese Eyes. I know this is a kind of a controversial record in that not only the title probably, but a lot of people find this record incredibly pretentious. But, you know, Pete's my favorite songwriter, probably my favorite guitar player, and one of my favorite singers. And I think this is a brilliant, gorgeous record. I listen to it a lot. I love it. And if I was stranded somewhere, I'd probably miss it. So that's my first pick, Pete Townsend's All the Best Cowboys Have Chinese Eyes. Second disc is one I picked up fairly recently. I'd had it on cassette for years, but finally got it on a good vinyl copy. Dusty Springfield's Dusty in Memphis. This is the remastered Rhino version. I know Baraka P-Dub did a review of a couple of different pressings of this a while back. Said this one was one of the best ones, so this is the one I got, and it does sound pretty good. I think the background noise is a little harsh, but I don't know that there'd be any way to avoid that. Maybe that's just tape hiss they can't get rid of because it's 50 years old. But yeah, Dusty in Memphis, classic record. Fantastic. Speaking of fantastic, although I think this actually says fascinating, or fascinating, this is a record I picked up a while back that I just love because I love the sound of it. I try to play drums. I'm not great. I don't put enough effort into it, but I do enjoy it. And I found this record a few years ago, and I'm kind of addicted to it. I play it quite a bit because it just sounds, it's some of the best recorded drums I've ever heard, and I love it. And I would be upset if someone took it from me. Clarinetist Pete Fountain, I'm a big fan of his. I've got a bunch of his records, and he did a record along with his drummer Jack Sperling back in, I think, 64, 65. Anyway, it's called Pete Fountain Presents Jack Sperling and His Fascinating Rhythm, and it's basically Pete Fountain, his typical kind of jazz clarinet work, but it really has the drums mixed way up front. And Jack Sperling was an incredible drummer, played on hundreds of records and toured with a lot of different people. Just absolutely incredible drummer that doesn't get nearly enough attention, probably. I think he passed away just a few years ago, but man, this is some of the best recorded drums I've ever heard, and they sound absolutely amazing, and I enjoy this record a lot. And kind of an esoteric choice on my part, I suppose, but hey, one of my favorite records, wouldn't be without it. Next one is, I think that's the only live record I picked. Little Feat's Waiting for Columbus. In my opinion, one of the best live records ever. Some jackass named Dean wrote his name on the cover, but I paid $4 for this. It's a double, and it must be one of the records they refer to as a hot stamper because I think it's a very early press. It sounds absolutely huge, and I listen to this quite often. Just great song selection, great songs, great musicianship, well recorded, a lot of fun, and wouldn't want to be without this one. So, moving on, next record. Probably my favorite Led Zeppelin record. It happens to be a double, so that's a bonus, extra music. Cover's a little faded. For some dumb reason, I put this in a record frame years ago, and it sat on my wall for about 15 years, so it's a bit faded, but the records themselves are like brand new, and they sound great, and this is my favorite Zeppelin record. Side 3 is probably my favorite record side of almost anybody's ever, and this gets listened to quite often, and yeah, Led Zeppelin's Physical Graffiti, one of my favorites. Definitely a keeper. Next one, Jethro Tull. A lot of great records. Aqualung, of course. But my favorite is probably this kind of considered a prog rock record, kind of considered a concept record, maybe even a rock opera, maybe. Thick as a Brick. This is a copy I've had for about 30 or 40 years, I guess. It's in really good condition, except for once again, some jackass had to write on the front of it with an ink pen, but the record's great. Record's in good shape. Jethro Tull's Thick as a Brick. Next is another double record. Been a big Kinks fan for a long time. I like most of their catalog. They changed with the times. They had their ups and downs, their ins and outs, but my absolute favorite Kinks record of all time is Muswell Hillbillies, and I picked this up new, I think maybe on Amazon. No, it's from an eBay seller, about 2.5 years ago, and this was kind of my gateway back into buying vinyl. I hadn't bought any new vinyl in a long time, but this is a 180 gram remastered, remixed Rhino. I think it's a Rhino release. Anyway, sounds fantastic. Great album, great songs. Kind of almost an Americana, which for 1971 for a British band, it's pretty ahead of its time. But somehow, I don't know how, but somehow the British bands seem to get Americana almost better than a lot of American artists do. I don't know why that is, but this is a good one. Kinks, Muswell Hillbillies. The first CD, excuse me, need another drink. The first CD that I bought back in 1985 or 86 when I bought a CD player was actually this. Obviously this isn't a CD. But Pink Floyd's Animals was always one of my favorite Pink Floyd records, so when I bought a CD player new back in the day, that was the first CD I bought. I still have it. But I did replace it on vinyl about 2 years ago maybe, and well worth the money. This is one of the Pink Floyd Incorporated releases from I think 2016 or so. Anyway, sounds fantastic. Pink Floyd's Animals, my favorite Pink Floyd record. And another record that I remember when this came out, I think 1980, I believe. I remember one of the only places we could buy music in my town back then, at least at walking distance or bicycling distance from the house, was Walmart. And they actually had a pretty good record section back in the day. I remember they had a poster, Subway poster, gigantic, mattress-sized poster of this record on the wall. And I remember seeing the cover, and I remember seeing the girl on the cover, and absolutely just falling in love with this photograph, if nothing else. Didn't really know that much about the music at the time, but years later, discovered this CD. It became one of my favorite CDs, and a couple years ago, I bought it on vinyl. I think I paid $20 for the digital remastered 180 gram version of it, and since found a copy of it for $1 that sounds almost as good, but not quite, so I'm holding on to this one. But it's Ricky Lee Jones' debut record from 1980. I probably, in my opinion, and argue with somebody. I don't know why I would argue with somebody, but I would argue that this is probably the best debut record from a solo artist ever. Every song on this record is incredible. The musicianship on this is incredible. The recording, the mastering, everything about it is just top notch. And to think that this was somebody's first record, you know, she put out a lot of good stuff after this, but nothing, in my opinion, that this is the best one. I love this record, and it sounds incredible. And even if you find a copy of this for $1 or $2, chances are it probably sounds 90% as good as this one does, because this was just such a well-recorded album originally. Like I said, even my $1 copy sounds, you know, if I didn't know how good this sounds and I didn't already have it, I would be happy with the $1 one that I bought recently. So anyway, Ricky Lee Jones, if you don't know it, check it out. And lastly, I've been a Who fan, obviously, for a long time. They've probably pretty much always been my favorite band. Love Pete Townsend, Keith Moon, you know, great to watch. One of the best rock drummers ever, at least for their kind of music. John Entwistle, you know, epic bass player, and you know, Roger Daltrey, one of the best rock vocalists ever. As much as I like Pete, and I think, you know, I like Pete's voice in a lot of ways more than Roger's, but for the stuff that Roger sang, I can't imagine anybody else singing it. Anyway, The Who. Probably my favorite Who record. I discovered this one back in the mid-'80s. I had a friend that was a big Who fan, and he introduced me to this record, and been a fan ever since. It's The Who's Quadrophenia. Again, another double, but this has some of my favorite Who tracks. I think it's Pete's opus. This is some of the best work Pete ever did. I got to see their Quadrophenia tour a couple of years ago. Of course, it's just Roger and Pete at this point, but still, getting to hear those songs performed live, getting to see those guys was quite an emotional experience. You know, the protagonist in this story, Jimmy. You know, I think most of us that grew up, you know, not quite fitting in, maybe trying a little too hard sometimes to fit in, can sympathize with Jimmy in this story. So anyway, this is probably my favorite record ever by anybody, and I come back to this over and over and over again. But The Who's Quadrophenia, one of my favorite records ever. I love it, and wouldn't want to be without it. So that's it, 10 records, and hope this didn't take too long. And like I said, these aren't necessarily my absolute favorite records, and that would probably change from day to day, and I could have gotten a little bit more diverse picks, maybe some country, maybe some jazz, but when it comes right down to it, those are 10 of the records I listen to the most. I would miss them if I didn't get to hear them. And anyway, that's my 10, and enjoy the rest of your day, and thanks for watching. Hit subscribe, and once again, cheers, peace, out.